Imagine holding in your hand a piece of American history that reflects the politics, the culture, the artistry, and the economics of its time. The 1977 half-dollar may look like an ordinary coin to many, but in truth, it is part of a long evolving story that began decades earlier with the birth of the Kennedy half-dollar and stretches through the fabric of American life in the 20th century. To fully understand the 1977 half-dollar, you must first look back to the moment that gave rise to the Kennedy half-dollar itself. The tragic assassination of President John F. Kennedy in November 1963 shocked the world, and just weeks later a movement began to honor him with a coin. Congress swiftly authorized the design of a half-dollar carrying his portrait, and in early 1964, the Kennedy half-dollar was born. Struck in 90% silver, it instantly became a beloved tribute, collected, cherished, and hoarded by Americans everywhere, and its popularity was so immense that it practically vanished from circulation. People saw it as more than money, they saw it as a memorial, as a reminder of a young president taken too soon. As the years passed, the coin endured changes in metal composition due to rising silver prices. In 1965, the United States shifted from 90% silver to a reduced composition of 40% silver clad. And then by 1971, the Treasury removed silver entirely, introducing a copper-nickel-clad half-dollar similar in composition to the quarter and the dime. This is the background against which the 1977 half-dollar was struck, and to appreciate its meaning, you must view it within the broader context of these changes. The year 1977 was a period of transformation in the United States. The nation was grappling with the aftermath of the Vietnam War, the cultural shifts of the 70s, the economic turbulence of inflation and unemployment, and a desire for renewal under the presidency of Jimmy Carter. While these events shaped the country, the mint continued producing coins for commerce, and among them the Kennedy half-dollar remained a fixture, though its role in everyday circulation was diminishing. By this time, fewer Americans used half-dollars in daily transactions. They were often stored away, given as gifts, or used in casinos and vending machines. And yet, their presence carried a certain prestige. Larger than quarters, heavier than dimes, the half-dollar represented something distinct in the American coinage system. The 1977 half-dollar was minted at two main facilities, Philadelphia and Denver, each producing millions of coins. The Philadelphia coins bore no mint mark, while the Denver coins carried the familiar D mark on the obverse beneath the truncation of Kennedy's portrait. San Francisco also struck proof coins for collectors with an S mint mark. These proofs were specially made with polished dies and planchets, yielding sharp details and mirror-like surfaces, intended not for circulation, but for numismatic appreciation. The obverse of the 1977 half-dollar continued to feature Gilroy Roberts' iconic portrait of John F. Kennedy, first introduced in 1964. The profile of the young president facing left became one of the most recognized designs in American coinage, with Roberts' careful rendering of Kennedy's hair conveying strength, vigor, and dignity. The inscriptions "Liberty" and "In God We Trust" framed the portrait along with the date 1977 below. A reverse Frank Gasparo's heraldic eagle remained unchanged, the eagle with a shield on its chest clutching an olive branch and arrows in its talons, surrounded by a ring of stars, and the inscription "United States of America" and half-dollar. This design drew inspiration from the Great Seal of the United States, symbolizing power, peace, and the federal government. Together, the obverse and reverse designs connected the coin to themes of leadership, patriotism, and national identity. The production figures for the 1977 half-dollar were substantial. Philadelphia struck over 43 million coins, while Denver produced more than 31 million. The San Francisco Mint added over 3 million proofs. Despite these large mintages, the half-dollar was not widely encountered in daily commerce. Banks often held rolls of them, but ordinary Americans seldom received them as change, and this made them both common in availability and yet strangely absent in circulation as numismatic pieces. The 1977 half-dollar is not considered rare in ordinary condition, circulated Coins are easily found, and their value is typically just their face value. However, in uncirculated condition, especially coins graded highly by professional services, they can command premiums. Collectors seek examples with sharp strikes, minimal contact marks, and strong luster. The San Francisco proofs, meanwhile, attract interest from enthusiasts building proof sets and specialized Kennedy half-dollar collections. Some varieties also add intrigue to the 1977 half-dollar series. Errors, such as doubled dies, repunched mint marks, and striking anomalies, are carefully studied by specialists. While these varieties are relatively scarce, they bring excitement to the field because they connect ordinary-looking coins to rare production quirks. Of the mint, the 1977 half-dollar is also significant because it reflects the ongoing role of the Kennedy half-dollar as a commemorative symbol. Long after its initial release by the mid-70s, the emotional immediacy of Kennedy's assassination had softened, but the coin remained a constant reminder of his legacy. It carried forward into the Carter years, into the Reagan years, and beyond, serving as a circulating memorial to a president who inspired a generation. In cultural terms, the coin tied Americans to the ideals of the new frontier and the promise of leadership that Kennedy embodied. Even as the nation faced new challenges in global politics and domestic economics, the Kennedy half-dollar offered continuity, stability, and remembrance. The year 1977 also sits in an important chapter of minting history for the United States Mint itself. During this era, new technologies were being refined. The mints were experimenting with improved coining presses, die preparation, and quality control that laid groundwork for modern numismatics. The coins of the late 70s are part of this transitional period where mass production met growing collector interest, and the Kennedy half-dollar was at the forefront of this experience. For millions of hobbyists, to craft a detailed history of the 1977 half-dollar is to recognize it as more than just copper and nickel. It is a snapshot of American identity, economics, and memory. It ties into the legacy of President Kennedy, reveals the technical achievements and challenges of the mint. It reflects patterns of usage in American commerce, and it remains a cornerstone of modern coin collecting. From the minute details of die varieties to the sweeping story of its design heritage, the 1977 half-dollar offers endless depth for numismatists, historians, and everyday Americans who hold one and wonder about its story. Every scratch, every shine, every mint mark tells a piece of that history. And when you see the face of Kennedy on the obverse, you are not just seeing a president, you are seeing the hopes and struggles of a nation etched in metal. The 1977 half-dollar endures as a bridge between past and present, a coin born of tragedy, sustained by patriotism, and preserved by collectors who know that even the most common-looking pieces can carry extraordinary stories when viewed through the lens of history. This is why a simple coin can fill hours of exploration, and why the 1977 half-dollar deserves its place, not only in albums and collections, but in the broader narrative of America itself. Imagine holding in your hand a piece of American history struck in 1995. A half-dollar coin that on the surface seems like just another circulating piece of money, but in reality carries layers of symbolism, artistry, politics, economics, and a story that ties into both national identity and modern coinage design. The 1995 half-dollar coin stands as a continuation of a long lineage of Kennedy half-dollars, a series that began in 1964 as a tribute to President John F. Kennedy following his tragic assassination. This coin is not just about its silver-colored appearance or its face value. It represents the continuation of a cultural legacy, the struggle of the United States Mint to maintain relevance in a changing monetary system, and the story of how Americans interacted with their currency in the last decade of the 20th century. To understand the 1995 half-dollar, you must first trace the Kennedy half-dollar series back to its birth in 1964, when the nation mourned the loss of its young president. The coin quickly became a symbol of national unity, but as years passed, it also became a reminder of the challenges facing circulating coinage: the rising cost of silver, inflation, and the decline in use of half-dollars for everyday Transactions. By the mid-1990s, the coin had become more of a collector's item than a coin of commerce. In 1995, this dynamic was firmly in place, and the Kennedy half-dollar struck that year carries with it the story of why Americans still clung to the design, what role the coin served in the minting system, and how collectors saw in it a connection to both modern history and numismatic heritage. The obverse of the 1995 half-dollar continued the tradition of Gilroy Roberts' portrait of John F. Kennedy, an image that had become one of the most recognized in American numismatics. This design was carefully sculpted to capture Kennedy's youthful vigor, his iconic hairstyle, and his statesman-like presence. In the 1995 issue, this design remained unaltered, but what made it interesting was how the mint preserved this likeness while also keeping up with the standards of modern engraving technology. Collectors of the time could see in the details of Kennedy's face the balance between mid-20th century artistry and the precision of late 20th century minting technology. The inscriptions "Liberty and God We Trust" and the date 1995 carried not only the formal identity of the coin, but also the reminder of continuity across decades. The reverse of the coin featured the presidential seal adapted by Frank Gasparro, showing the heraldic eagle with a shield on its breast holding an olive branch and arrows in its talons, and surrounded by 50 stars. This was not merely decorative, it was a direct representation of the power, authority, and symbolism of the American presidency, a reminder of Kennedy's role and the enduring institution of the office. In 1995, this reverse still resonated strongly with the public, tying the coin to themes of patriotism, governance, and national pride. Composition of the 1995 half-dollar reflected changes that had occurred decades earlier. While the first Kennedy half-dollars were struck in 90% silver, the mint transitioned to a copper-nickel-clad composition in 1971, making the coin more practical for mass production and circulation. The 1995 issue followed this same copper-nickel-clad standard with the core of pure copper and outer layers of copper-nickel alloy. The mint also produced a limited number of silver proofs for collectors in 90% silver. These silver proofs struck at San Francisco held special significance for collectors who valued both the intrinsic metal content and the brilliance of proof striking methods. The production of half-dollars in 1995 was largely influenced by collector demand rather than general circulation. By this time, most Americans rarely encountered half-dollars in daily commerce. Banks stocked them infrequently, and vending machines seldom accepted them. Yet the United States Mint continued to strike millions of them, largely because collectors and hobbyists purchased rolls and mint sets, keeping the series alive. This is crucial to understanding the 1995 half-dollar. It was a coin minted in large numbers, but seldom used in transactions, a coin that was more a symbolic continuation of tradition than a practical tool of commerce. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint were the primary facilities for circulation strikes, while the San Francisco Mint specialized in proof versions for collectors. Each mint mark carried its own value for numismatists. Philadelphia coins bore no mint mark, Denver coins carried the D, and San Francisco coins carried the S. The proof coins were especially prized for their mirror-like fields, frosted devices, and overall sharp detail. The quality of the 1995 proof half-dollars demonstrated the mint's ongoing commitment to producing collector-grade coins that could hold their own against the finest world issues. One of the most fascinating aspects of the 1995 half-dollar lies in its role within numismatic culture of the 1990s. This was a decade of revival in American coin collecting, with interest fueled by both the advent of modern proof sets and the anticipation of the State Quarters program, which would debut in 1999. The Kennedy half-dollar remained a central anchor for collectors, and the 1995 issue symbolized a bridge between the classic era of mid-century commemorative coinage and the modern era of popular coin collecting. While casual Americans may not have used the coin much, serious hobbyists continued to study varieties, mintages, and quality levels, making the 1995 half-dollar a subject of detailed cataloging. Mintage figures themselves tell part of the story, with tens of millions struck for circulation, but far fewer actually circulating. The majority found their way into collections, coin rolls, or government packaged Sets the scarcity in circulation made the coin feel almost like a semi-numismatic piece in its own time. The 1995 half dollar was not rare in absolute terms, but it was rare in daily life, which made the experience of encountering one in pocket change all the more remarkable from a historical perspective. The 1995 half dollar illustrates the broader economic and cultural trends of the United States during the 1990s. This was an era of relative economic stability, technological progress, and global influence. The coin reflects the persistence of traditional national symbols, even as the country moved toward a new millennium. It also reflects the mint's balancing act between practicality and tradition. The half dollar was not essential for commerce, but it was essential for heritage and public symbols. Collectors today look back at the 1995 half dollar as an important marker in the Kennedy series. While not as rare or valuable as key dates, it remains significant for its role in maintaining continuity. It represents the late modern period of the series, before the design began to be overshadowed by newer and flashier programs like the 50 state quarters and the presidential dollar coins. Yet, the 1995 half dollar held its place, reminding collectors that the Kennedy series was not just about rarity or value, but about memory, continuity, and national identity. So, when you hold a 1995 half dollar, you are not simply holding 50 cents, you are holding a coin that represents a 30-year-old tribute to an American president, a coin that carries artistry from Gilroy Roberts and Frank Gasparro, a coin that symbolizes a period of American culture where coins transition from practical tools of commerce to cherished collectible artifacts. Its story is long, detailed, and deeply connected to the narrative of American coinage, and it remains a fascinating study for numismatists, historians, and casual coin lovers alike. In the mid-1970s, America stood at a turning point in its history, and this turning point was not only felt in politics, culture, and society, but also etched forever into the very coins that passed through the hands of millions of Americans. And among these coins, the 1976 half dollar, known as the bicentennial Kennedy half dollar, holds a place unlike any other, because the single piece of metal captures the celebration of 200 years of American independence, the memory of a fallen president, and the story of a nation that was both looking back at its birth and forward to its future. To understand the power of this coin, we must travel back to 1963, when the assassination of President John F. Kennedy shocked the world. Within months, his portrait replaced Benjamin Franklin on the half dollar, symbolizing both national mourning and collective memory. But fast forward to the early 1970s, when the United States was preparing to mark the bicentennial of the Declaration of Independence, the Treasury and Congress knew that something special had to be done with American coinage, so the mint prepared a commemorative redesign for the quarter, the half dollar, and the Eisenhower dollar coins, and in doing so they created some of the most recognized coins in modern US history. The 1976 Kennedy half dollar became a centerpiece of the celebration, bearing a reverse design unlike any other ever struck before. The reverse, designed by Seth G. Huntington, depicted Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the birthplace of American liberty. It was a design meant to capture the very heart of the bicentennial, the place where the Founding Fathers had declared freedom 2 centuries earlier, and on the obverse the familiar and iconic bust of John F. Kennedy by Gilroy Roberts remained a constant, reminding the nation of leadership, sacrifice, and enduring vision. The combination of Kennedy's image on the front and Independence Hall on the back created a coin that bridged 2 defining moments: the Revolution of 1776 and the tragedy of 1963. The coin was issued with the dual date 1776 to 1976 instead of the usual single date, and this immediately made it stand out for collectors and everyday Americans alike. It symbolized the sweep of history, 200 years of struggle, triumph, innovation, and resilience, and unlike many commemorative coins that were struck in small quantities, the bicentennial half dollars were produced in the hundreds of millions by the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, and struck in both circulation strike copper, nickel clad, and special collector issues in 40% silver, making them accessible every pocket. and yet also desirable for numismatists. When you hold a 1976 half-dollar, you are holding not only money, but also a monument to history, a coin that traveled in circulation through the hands of everyday citizens during the great celebrations of America's bicentennial. Fireworks parades and patriotic displays swept across every city and town, and the very coins used to buy food tickets and souvenirs bore this special design. But beyond its circulation use, the coin also reflects the fascinating economics of the mint and the collector market. In the 1970s, the U.S. Mint had learned from the lessons of the 1960s, when silver was withdrawn from coinage and coin collecting boomed. So when the bicentennial approached, the mint prepared large quantities of special collector sets, proof and uncirculated issues to satisfy both patriotic Americans and numismatists. And today, these coins, whether found in circulated condition jingling in old drawers or in pristine condition sealed in government packaging, remain an enduring symbol of that era. But to appreciate the full history of the 1976 Kennedy half-dollar, we must go deeper into the design, the production, the cultural meaning, and the collector value. We must understand the symbolism of Independence Hall, why Huntington's design was chosen, and how it competed with other proposed sketches. We must examine the production process in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, the challenges of striking dual-dated coins, the use of special bicentennial dies, and the decision to mint both clad and silver issues. We must look at the distribution and marketing by the mint, how proof and mint sets were sold in massive numbers as keepsakes for the bicentennial celebration. We must also trace how the public reacted to the coin, how many Americans saved them as souvenirs rather than spending them, how dealers and collectors predicted future values, and how over time the market for bicentennial half-dollars evolved, with some issues like the 40% silver proofs gaining stronger premiums while the clad versions remained common in circulation. And then there is the story of Kennedy's legacy itself, for this coin was more than a commemoration of the revolution, it was also a continuation of the memorial to America's 35th president, whose youthful energy and tragic death left an indelible mark on the nation. The bicentennial coinage thus became not only a patriotic tribute, but also a cultural artifact representing hope, loss, remembrance, and pride. And as we unfold this history, we must also analyze its place among other bicentennial coinage: the quarter with Jack L.R.'s colonial drummer, and the Eisenhower dollar with Dennis Williams' Liberty Bell and Moon design. Together they formed a triad of commemorative issues, each telling part of the bicentennial story. And yet, the half-dollar perhaps carried the most layered symbolism, because it was already tied to Kennedy's image, and now tied to Independence Hall, giving it a dual weight of memory and meaning. Collectors today often overlook the significance of the 1976 half-dollar because of its high mintage, but true students of numismatics understand that rarity is not the only measure of important significance. History, symbolism, and cultural resonance matter as much, and in those areas the bicentennial Kennedy half-dollar remains unmatched. Over the course of this deep exploration, we will walk through the origins, the artistic competition, the symbolism of the designs, the role of the mint, the mintage figures, the varieties, including clad and silver, the proof sets, and the collector reception. We will examine how values have shifted over time, why certain issues carry premiums, and why this coin remains an essential part of any serious US coin collection. By the end of this journey, you will see that the 1976 half-dollar is not just a coin, but a time capsule, a patriotic emblem, and a memorial rolled into one small disc of metal. And that is why when we hold it, we are holding not just currency, but a piece of America's story, and to understand it fully is to understand the very soul of the bicentennial era. Imagine holding in your hand a piece of metal that weighs only a few grams, yet carries within it the story of America in the early 1970s, a time of social change, political upheaval, and economic uncertainty. The 1971 half-dollar coin is not just a piece of currency, it is a window into the past, a physical object that reflects the decisions of the United States Mint, the legacy of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the transition away from silver coinage, and the ongoing evolution of American money. This coin, which at first glance seems ordinary, actually marks the beginning of an important chapter in US coin history, because 1971 was the very first year the United States stopped minting circulating half dollars and silver and instead moved fully into a copper-nickel-clad composition. That choice did not happen in isolation. It was the result of decades of debates within Congress, rising silver prices, and a changing economy that forced America to rethink what its coins should be made of. If we go back to the 1960s, we find that the Kennedy half dollar, first introduced in 1964, had been minted with 90% silver and 10% copper. That design was created almost overnight following the tragic assassination of President John F. Kennedy, as a way to honor his memory, and the American public embraced the coin with overwhelming passion. Millions of Americans hoarded the coin as keepsakes, and very few made it into circulation, but the rising price of silver soon made it impractical for the government to continue issuing these coins for everyday use. So in 1965, the mint reduced the silver content to 40%. And by 1971, the final shift occurred with the introduction of a half dollar that was no longer silver. All this transition was monumental because it signaled the end of an era for collectors and the beginning of a new one for everyday coinage. The 1971 half dollar became a dividing line between silver-era coins and modern-clad coinage. When we examine the coin itself, we find that it continues the Kennedy design with the left-facing portrait of the president on the obverse designed by Gilroy Roberts, and the presidential seal with the heraldic eagle on the reverse designed by Frank Gasparro. The design itself had already become iconic, representing both the memory of Kennedy and the prestige of the American presidency. But by 1971, this coin was no longer a symbol of wealth, it was a symbol of change. What makes the 1971 half dollar fascinating for collectors is not only its place in history, but also the details of how it was struck and distributed. The mint facilities at Philadelphia and Denver struck circulation coins, while the San Francisco Mint produced proof coins for collectors. The Philadelphia coins carried no mint mark, the Denver coins bore the D mint mark, and the San Francisco proof coins carried the S mint mark. But here is where things get even more intriguing, because within the 1971 production run certain varieties and errors were created that today make these coins far more valuable than their face value. Some of the most famous include the 1971 D half dollar struck on a silver planchet, a mistake that happened when leftover silver blanks from the earlier years were accidentally fed into the presses. These error coins are extremely rare and can fetch thousands of dollars at auction. Other errors include double dies, off-center strikes, and weakly struck designs, which add to the appeal for collectors and investors. Each of these rare varieties tells us something about the production challenges and the transition period at the mint during this time. And beyond the minting details, the coin also reflects the wider context of America in 1971. This was the year when the US was deeply involved in the Vietnam War, when President Nixon had announced the closing of the gold window, effectively ending the Bretton Woods system, and when inflation pressures were beginning to shape American life. The half dollar in 1971 circulated far less than other denominations, because the public had developed a habit of not using half dollars in everyday commerce. This created a paradox. The mint continued producing millions of half dollars, but banks and businesses reported low demand, leading to stockpiles in vaults. This circulation pattern has persisted to this day, making the half dollar one of the least used denominations in modern America, yet it remains one of the most recognized coins in the world for collectors. When you hold a 1971 half dollar, you are not just holding a piece of clad metal. You are holding the story of the United States shifting away from silver coinage, a government responding to economic pressures, a nation remembering a fallen president, and a mint adapting to new realities. This coin is a crossroads of history, and it is filled with secrets that make it far more than just 50 cents in value. In the course of this video, we will explore the detailed history of why the coin was created, how it was designed, what varieties and errors exist, how collectors value it today, and how this single piece of metal connects to the broader economic and political story of America in the 1970s, the 1971 half dollars, a coin that at first looks common. But by the end of our journey, you will see it is anything but common. By the time we arrive in 1971, the Kennedy half dollar had already gone through several transitions. The first year, 1964, was struck in 90% silver. Then from 1965 through 1970, the coins were reduced to 40% silver, a compromise between public expectation and economic necessity. But the rising global price of silver made even this compromise unsustainable. By 1971, silver had become too valuable for circulating coinage, and so the government officially ended the use of silver in the half dollar for everyday issues, replacing it with the copper nickel-clad composition, the same basic structure that had already been adopted for quarters and dimes, a copper core sandwiched between outer layers of nickel, giving the coin a silvery appearance without any intrinsic precious metal value. The decision was not without controversy. Many Americans felt that coins without silver were somehow cheap or less real, but from the perspective of the mint and the treasury, this was the only viable option to keep coins in circulation at their intended face value. So the 1971 half dollar emerged as the first fully clad Kennedy half dollar, a turning point in us Coinagawan. We look at the details of this coin. The Philadelphia Mint produced more than 155 million pieces, while the Denver Mint struck over 300 million, making it one of the highest mintage years in the series, and the San Francisco Mint focused on proof coinage for collectors, struck in deep cameo brilliance. The sheer volume of coins produced means that the 1971 half dollar in its normal circulation form is very common, yet the story becomes interesting when we uncover the rare exceptions and the striking errors that escaped quality control during this massive transition period. One of the most famous and desirable rarities is the 1971 D half dollar, struck on a 40% silver planchet. These rare errors occurred because leftover silver blanks from May 1970 have accidentally been fed into presses intended for the new clad coins. Only a handful of these silver planchet strikes have been authenticated, and when they appear at auction, they can sell for thousands of dollars. Other dramatic varieties include double die obverse coins, where the lettering or portrait shows noticeable doubling, creating a unique collectible item. Off-center strikes, broad strikes, and even coins struck on wrong planchets intended for other denominations. All of these errors are eagerly hunted by collectors because they connect to the uncertainty of that year, the literal mistakes made during a time of change. The story of the 1974 half dollar is far more than just the tale of a piece of metal struck by the United States Mint. It is a chapter in American history that reflects politics, art, public memory, and the transformation of coinage in the 20th century. To understand the 1974 half dollar, we must first go back to the origins of the Kennedy half dollar itself, because this coin was not simply a matter of monetary design, but rather a national symbol born out of tragedy. When President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963, the nation was plunged into mourning, and within weeks, the United States Mint received pressure from Congress and the American public to honor Kennedy on a circulating coin. The decision was made to place his image on the half dollar, replacing the Franklin design that had only been in use since 1948. And in 1964, the first Kennedy half dollar was struck in 90% silver and released to the public, where it was instantly hoarded as both a keepsake and a memorial to the fallen president. By the time 1974 arrived, the Kennedy half dollar had already been through a transformation in composition because silver was rapidly being removed from circulating coinage. The Coinage Act of 1965 had reduced the silver content of the half dollar to 40%, and then in 1971, the Mint abandoned silver entirely for general circulation, striking the Kennedy half dollar in a copper nickel-clad composition similar to the quarter and dime. So the 1974 half dollar became part of this new era, where the coin was no longer a silver piece, but rather a circulating clad coin that reflected inflation, rising costs of metal, and the modernization of American coinage. Design of the 1974 $50 still carried the same bold portrait of John F. Kennedy created by Gilroy Roberts, the chief engraver of the United States Mint. His profile faces left with sharp features that gave the coin an enduring sense of authority and memorial dignity. The reverse was designed by Frank Gasparo, featuring the presidential coat of arms with the heraldic eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch surrounded by a ring of 50 stars, symbolizing the unity of the nation. By 1974, this design had become iconic and familiar to millions of Americans, but it was still relatively new in the history of US coinage, only a decade old, yet firmly tied to the memory of Kennedy and the turbulent 1960s. The year 1974 itself was a dramatic year in American history, with the Watergate scandal unfolding and eventually forcing the resignation of President Richard Nixon. Coins minted during this time carry the silent backdrop of a country facing political division, economic challenges, and a loss of trust in leadership. Yet the Kennedy $50 served as a reminder of a different president, one remembered more favorably and connected to a hopeful vision of the future. The 1974 $50 was struck at 3 minting facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia coins carry no mint mark. The Denver coins bear the familiar D mark, and the San Francisco Mint produced both regular proofs and special collector strikes with the S mint mark. The mintage was very large, with tens of millions struck at both Philadelphia and Denver, and millions of proof issues from San Francisco. Yet despite these high mintages, the coin was rarely seen in daily use, because by the mid-1970s, the $50 had already begun its slow disappearance from circulation. Vending machines, cash registers, and banks did not favor the size of the $50, and the public simply did not use it regularly. Most of the coins went into storage or into collections, and even today original rolls of 1974 $50 can be found largely untouched. But what makes the 1974 $50 fascinating for collectors is not just its widespread mintage, but the presence of notable varieties and errors among them. The most famous is the 1974 D double die obverse, where the lettering on the obverse, particularly in the word trust in the motto "In God We Trust," shows strong doubling. This variety has captured the attention of collectors because while it is not as dramatic as the famous 1955 double die cent, it is still a major double die of the modern era and can command significant premiums depending on condition. Examples in high mint state or proof-like grades are especially desirable and can turn a common coin worth 50 cents into a numismatic treasure worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Another important aspect of the 1974 series is its role in proof coinage, as the San Francisco Mint continued to perfect its techniques for mirror-like fields and frosted devices. Collectors could obtain high-quality proof coins directly from the mint, packaged in official government sets. These proofs serve as time capsules of the mint's capabilities during the mid-1970s, and their preservation in pristine condition makes them popular among serious numismatists. Historical context of the 1974 $50 also extends into broader monetary policy in the United States, because by this time Americans were adjusting to a currency system no longer backed by precious metals. President Nixon had taken the US off the gold standard completely in 1971, and the removal of silver from circulating coinage was part of this larger break with metal-backed money. The 1974 $50 therefore represents both the memory of Kennedy and the practical reality of a modern fiat currency system. It is both symbol and tool, both commemoration and commerce, though commerce was less frequent because of the coin's declining usage in daily transactions. Scholarsist today study the 1974 $50 not just for its varieties, but also for grading conditions, mint state preservation, and strike quality. The clad composition was prone to contact marks and bag marks, making high-grade examples, especially in Ms. 66 or Ms. 67, difficult to obtain from original rolls. Grading services like PCGs and NGC have recorded relatively few in the highest grades, which means that registry collectors who build sets of Kennedy halves often pursue these top-end 1974 issues aggressively. This pursuit drives prices higher for the finest examples, even though the majority of coins remain common in lower circulated grades. When we step back and view the 1974 half dollar within the entire timeline of American coinage, it occupies a unique position. It is neither as historically monumental as the first 1964 silver issue, nor as dramatically experimental as the bicentennial design of 1976, but it is firmly rooted in the heart of the 1970s. A coin struck during an era of political upheaval, economic transition, and cultural change. It carries the face of a president who symbolized youth, vigor, and optimism. Yet it circulated during a decade that saw disillusionment, stagflation, and scandal, making the coin both a reminder of lost promise and a participant in a new uncertain age. When you hold a 1974 half dollar, you are not just holding a piece of copper and nickel, you are holding a link to a president's memory, to a time when the mint was adjusting to new economic realities, to a nation wrestling with trust in leadership, and to the enduring American habit of turning tragedy into tribute through coinage. The 1974 half dollar may not be rare in sheer numbers, but it is rare in meaning because it speaks to a transitional decade in the United States and to the continuing legacy of Kennedy's image on American money.